Chapter 1. The wishing tree secretly had scarcely settled into my favourite armchair by the drawing-room hearth at Styles Manor when Hercule Poirot announced, in that clipped, deliberate fashion of his, that our evening promenade would carry us to the ancient wishing tree on the estate's edge. The moon hung low over the silvered lawns, and a stillness lay upon the old oaks, an atmosphere charged with anticipation. My pulse quickened. There was something in the air, a subtle tremor of mystery that set my nerves alight. Poirot wore his customary grey suit and conical hat, and his waxed moustache bristled with expectation. He turned his keen black eyes on me as I rose to join him. "Mon cher Hastings," he said, "tonight, the little grey cells will need their full power. Are you prepared?" I smiled and shouldered my walking stick. Resistance was futile when Poirot's detective instincts stirred. We walked along the moonlit avenue, past neatly clipped hedges and marble statues of forlorn cherubs, until we reached the solitary tree. Its gnarled trunk bore centuries of carvings, initials, hearts, prayers, each scar a testament to whispered hopes. Villagers professed that if one confided a wish to its bark, the tree would either grant it or witness the darkest of deeds. Poirot paused at the tree's base, gloved hand resting on the rough bark. I scanned the ground. Soft loam, scattered leaves, and footprints, tassettes, one of sturdy boot treads, the other delicate slipper prints. He pressed his palm harder. Notice, Hastings, how the woman's prints lead away from the seat, not toward it. Beneath a low-lying branch lay a silk handkerchief, its edges embroidered with EB. Poirot picked it up gingerly on a corner of his cuff. "Elodie Blanchard," he murmured, "young, impulsive, and judging by last night's carriage ride undeniably anxious." I recalled the rumours, Elodie's hurried engagement to Maurice Desjardins, the cold-eyed banker, whispers of a hidden scandal, furtive glances at dinner. Yet none dared to voice such suspicions aloud. Poirot folded the handkerchief into his coat pocket and studied the ground further. "See here," he said, pointing to a patch of crushed ferns leading into the undergrowth. "A hurried departure. And here," he stooped and touched a torn corner of crimson fabric. "A man's scarf." I bent to retrieve it. The material was soft wool, torn jaggedly. Desjardins' signature hue. I observed. He favours that shade, precisely. But why should he brush against these thorny brambles? Poirot pocketed the scarf. There was a struggle or urgency. We followed the tracks into the undergrowth, stepping carefully over brittle twigs, until Poirot halted by a small mound of earth at the tree's base. He tapped at it with the toe of his polished shoe, and the sole gave way to reveal a silver locket, its clasp unfastened. Inside lay a lock of auburn hair, and a water-damaged portrait of a woman whose eyes, though faded, shone with earnest intensity. "Mon Dieu!" I exclaimed. "Who is she?" Poirot's moustache bristled in satisfaction. "Someone from Desjardins' past, perhaps a first love or a jilted mistress." The banker kept her memory close, hidden beneath bark, or perhaps someone placed the locket here to mislead. I glanced back at the empty seat beneath the sprawling branches. "Do you believe a crime occurred here?" He straightened and surveyed the moonlit clearing with sweeping grandeur. "Yes, Hastings, a crime of the heart, or of greed. These tokens, handkerchief, scarf, locket, are puzzle pieces. We must discover whether they point to love, betrayal, or murder." A distant clock tower tolled twice. Its sonorous chimes echoed like a funeral knell. I shivered. "We should inform Inspector Heathcote at once." Poirot lifted a gloved finger. "Not yet. The police will glean little unless we direct them. First, we must note every detail. I want to learn who tread these grounds at this hour and why." We retraced our steps toward the manor. Minds racing, the moon slipped behind a veil of clouds. Casting the clearing into shadow, the wishing tree stood silent. its branches reaching skyward like pleading hands. Beneath its ancient boughs, his secret slumbered one that would awaken at dawn to shatter the calm of Styles Manor. As we entered the lamplit corridors, I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon us. The tokens in Poirot's pocket, TB's handkerchief, Desjardins' scarf, the secret locket spoke of hidden connections and forbidden meetings. And I sensed, with that indefinable intuition Poirot so admired, that the night's discoveries were but the first act in a drama of deception and death. Little did we know, as we hurried to summon the authorities, that by morning a body would be found and that nothing, not even the purity of moonlight, could wash away the stain of what had transpired beneath the wishing tree. Chapter 2. The first clues. Dawn's pale fingers of light crept through the tall mullioned windows of the great hall as I joined Hercule Poirot for a closer inspection of the wishing tree clearing. The air was chill and damp, heavy with the scent of earth and fallen leaves. The police had already cordoned off the area, but Poirot's presence earned us a discreet pass past the yellow tape. Inspector Heathcote lingered by the tree's base, clipboard in hand, while uniformed officers photographed the scene. Poirot crouched beside the flattened tuft of grass where Maurice Desjardins' body had lain, soft. Mud still clung to the tuft's roots, and dew pooled in the imprint of his coat collar. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, voice low. "The angle of indentation here is shallow." He did not slump, but was placed gently. This was no sudden collapse. Someone laid him down with care. I peered at the disturbed soil. So he was killed elsewhere and carried here. Possible, Poirot agreed. Or he was struck suddenly, rendered helpless, and then conveyed to this spot as a ruse. In either case, the villain wished to stave the scene beneath this venerable tree. The inspector approached. "Monsieur Poirot." The pathologist's initial report: cause of death, strangulation with a thin cord. Likely garrote, no bruising. On the neck apart from faint discoloration. Time of death estimated between 2 and 2:30 this morning. Poirot's eyes sparkled. A cord suggests premeditation and planning. The killer came prepared, and yet the broken branch and torn scarf indicate a struggle or haste. There is a contradiction in method and execution. Inspector Heathcote nodded. We found no cord on the scene, so the murderer moved it. I've ordered a search of personal effects, but nothing has surfaced. Poirot rose and swept his coat aside. "Let us look further afield." He led us along a narrow tram line that ran from the tree toward the east gate. The ground was firm here, and the boots of Maurice Desjardins had left a clear tread. Beside them, the proof imprinter had inscribed delicate slipper marks, Elodie Blanchard's slipper heel. I noted from its ornate shape. We followed the prints to where they vanished near a tangle of brambles. There. Poirot paused. "Notice, Hastings, these tiny fragments of glass." He pointed to glints of crystalline shards through the underbrush. I knelt, retrieving a small piece of clear glass rim. "It looked like part of a perfume bottle." "Perfume," I said. Likely from Madame Dupont's toilet," said she. "Favors a floral de cologne contained in a slender crystal vial. The rogue ingredient here is that Maurice Desjardins had no reason to carry perfume, so someone else brought it." Inspector Heathcote frowned. "I'll have the servants' rooms searched for missing bottles." We continued along a narrow track toward the edge of the wood, where torches from the later search party still smoldered. A riot of hoofprints and boot marks crisscrossed here. But Poirot's trained eye picked out one fresh print, small and deep, as if weighted. "The gardener's brogues," he declared. "Monsieur Leclerc's, no doubt." He looked toward the gardener's lodge in the distance. "But why would he be here at this hour?" "His shift begins at dawn. It's possible he took an unscheduled stroll." I ventured. "Perhaps," Poirot said, "or he flushed out a nocturnal order." But note that his print overlaps Desjardins' boots, a sign that he came after the banker, and the heel splinter near the base of the tree suggests he leaned heavily against that trunk. As we inspected the base of the ancient oak once more, Poirot called my attention to a faint smear of dark resin on the bark above head height, sap from fresh wounds in the wood, he noted. Where a pruning hook has cracked the bark, a discreet tool, easily concealed, a gardener's implement borrowed to mislead. The inspector made a note. We'll catalogue all gardening tools, Poirot rose, brushing a few specks of earth from his gloves. Now, Hastings, we have uncovered materials called glass, sap and tracks belonging to at least 3 persons. Yet the heart of the matter lies in motive. What drove our victim here at such an hour? He turned to Inspector Heathcote. Pray, show us the banker's study at Styles Manor. The study was a hushed sanctum of dark-polished wood and leather-bound volumes. Sunlight slanted through heavy drapes, casting golden bars across Maurice Desjardins' mahogany desk. Open ledgers lay atop it, entries blurred by ink smears. The green-shaded lamp still glowed faintly, as though abandoned mid-task. Poirot ran a gloved finger along the ledger's margin. Here, Hastings is the entry dated 3 days ago. E.B., £50, a payment to Elodie Blanchard. Perhaps toward her father's debts. Why would a banker give large sums to his fiancée so clandestinely? I examined the books. He was generous, or perhaps had a reason to hush up the transaction. I recall Madame Dupont's complaint that the new will left everything to Elodie. Exactly. Poirot murmured, and considered this. He picked up a small parcel, wrapped in plain brown paper, and bound with twine. A gift, perhaps, meant for someone's private satisfaction. He untied it to reveal a slender gold cigarette case, monogrammed, and either lining was crimson velvet. And 8 tiny cigarettes remained each, bearing the faint aroma of a rare tobacco. I raised an eyebrow. A personal gift, perhaps, Poirot said, replacing the case, or a bribe. And see here, Hastings beneath the blotter, the pressed letter, folded twice. It bears the seal of Lady Constance Fitzwilliam. He broke the seal to reveal half a page in elegant handwriting. Monsieur, I regret that business compels me abroad. Meet me at the Wishing Tree to dot Constance. I stared at the note. Lady Constance summoned him. He did not wish to reveal it, Poirot said, or someone intercepted the letter. At any rate, this proves that Desjardins came here on a summons. Not of his own volition. I turned my gaze to the window, and yet Lady Constance swore she was in her suite until midnight. Poirot smiled thinly. Lies, Hastings, every suspect will lie to protect their secrets. Our task is to disentangle these webs. Back at the tree, Poirot paused beneath the sap-scarred branch. He removed from his jacket a small magnifying glass and held it over the locket's hiding spot. The soil here is richer, likely dug and replaced. The culprit wished to conceal the locket until a later meeting. He tapped his chin. Bees, handkerchief, the cord, the glass fragments, the locket, the letter clues of 2 meetings, one by Elodie, one by Constance, and then the bankers will change. The missing documents Mr. Sims spoke of. Inspector Heathcote raised his notebook. Are you suggesting a conspiracy of more than one party? Precisely, Poirot said. Murder seldom stands alone. It is often a collaborative performance, with actors playing parts and betraying each other in the wings. I shivered. But which actors are conspirators, and which merely unwitting pawns? Poirot folded his arms. That, mon ami, we shall discover in due course. For now, the clues have been gathered. We shall examine each suspect's alibi, probe their motives, and watch for fissures in their stories. In our next step, We will interview each individual one by one, testing the integrity of their words against the firmness of these first clues, as the morning mist lifted and the police began to dismantle their equipment. I sensed that the case was far from simple. Beneath the veneer of polite society, its Styles manner simmered black currents of greed, passion, and betrayal, and only the meticulous mind of Hercule Poirot could navigate those treacherous waters to the heart of the truth. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects late that morning. Poirot convened an assembly in the oak-panelled drawing-room of Styles Manor. The heavy curtains were drawn to temper the glare of the sun, and the hushed air carried the faint aroma of polished wood and fresh tea. A long mahogany table stood at the center, its surface cleared of clutter save for a single sheaf of papers, the police reports, and a copy of the newly discovered will. 9 chairs surrounded it, each poised to receive one of the individuals whose lives were now inextricably bound to Maurice Desjardins' fate. One by one, the suspects entered. First, Elodie Blanchard glided in, her pale blue dress whispering against the carpet. She carried herself with quiet dignity. Yet I caught the tremble in her slender shoulders as she paused by Poirot's chair. Her golden hair was pinned back, and her eyes large, luminous, flickered anxiously toward the folded will. She took her seat nearest the window, where the light caught the faintest sheen of perspiration at her brow. Behind her followed Felipe Marceau, Viscount and devoted friend. His expression measured beneath carefully trimmed mustache. His tailored morning coat was impeccable. Yet as he sat, I noticed the crease of worry between his brows. Rumor had it that Marceau's family estate teetered on the brink of bankruptcy, and Desjardins' favor toward Elodie threatened to divert any chance of a financial rescue for a Philip Skin.Nex. Madame Antoinette Dupont swept in, the very portrait of restrained fury. Her gown of burgundy silk was rich with embroidery, and she clutched a small lorgnette as though it were a weapon. The stern lines of her face contrasted sharply with the astonished gasp that escaped her when she glimpsed the will. Mon Dieu, she murmured, voice low but tremulous. He would leave everything to that interloper. She seated herself opposite Elodie, their mutual glare cutting the room into Mrs. Talbot. The housekeeper entered almost silently, hands folded over her starched apron. Her kind yet anxious face surveyed the group. She had served the Desjardins family faithfully for 16 years and now looked torn between loyalty to the family and fear of scandal. She chose a seat next to Dupont, as though seeking solidarity. Lady Constance Fitzwilliam swept in last of the ladies, her embroidered gloves tapping the arm of her chair as she sat. Though her silver hair betrayed her age, her eyes were sharp as a hawk's, and her posture betrayed impatience. She surveyed each suspect with cool appraisal, a faint smile playing at her lips as though she were privy to some private amusement. On the opposite side, Mr. Harold Sims took his seat next. Formerly a footman, he was now Desjardins' private secretary. His dark eyes were restless, and he clenched and unclenched a neatly folded handkerchief in his lap. Only days before, Desjardins had advanced him a considerable sum, Sims said, to settle family debts, but gossip suggested the money vanished without explanation. Dr. Owen called well-arrived next, adjusting the lapel of his grey waistcoat. As the family physician, he was the one most intimately acquainted with Desjardins' habits and ailments. He offered Poirot a courteous nod, then perched on the edge of his chair, as though ready to spring to his feet at a moment's notice. His expression was professionally calm, yet I detected a furtive glance toward the window. Perhaps he pondered a medical reason for Desjardins' presence at the tree. Monsieur Jules Leclerc, the French gardener, entered with deliberate steps, mud faintly visible on his brogues. His shoulders were broad, and his hands rough from toil, but his eyes were troubled. He chose the chair nearest the door, as though ready to flee. Rumors had swirled that Desjardins planned to dismiss him. after the summer season, leaving Leclerc's livelihood at risk. Finally, Miss Clara Whitfield, the governess, slipped in. Her slender frame was dressed in demure black, her dark hair coiled neatly at her neck. She carried a small notebook, which she tucked into her lap. Her pale face revealed nothing, but the tension in her jaw suggested she bore secrets she was loath to reveal. When all were seated, Poirot rose, tapping his cane lightly on the rug. Mesdames et messieurs, you are doubtless aware that Maurice Desjardins met his end beneath the wishing tree in the early hours. We have discovered many clues: Elodie's handkerchief, the banker's scarf, a silver locket, a summons letter, and evidence of accord. But these tokens speak only in fragments. It is now my task to learn, from each of you, what lay behind these delicate deceptions. He paused, sweeping his gaze across the assembled faces. We shall begin with introductions, and your relationship to the deceased. Then we shall explore any secrets you hold that connect you to him. He turned first to Elodie. Mademoiselle Blanchard, you stand to gain under the new will. Speak plainly. Why would Monsieur Desjardins leave his fortune to you rather than? His niece, Elodie's hands clasped her fan tightly. Monsieur Desjardins was like a father to me, she said softly. He promised support when my own family faltered. I confess that our relationship, though innocent, was deeply private. He feared gossip, hence the secrecy of my allowance. I never asked for more, though I would be forever grateful for his generosity. Poirot nodded, lips curved in a sympathetic smile. Vous êtes sincere, but sincerity is no defense against suspicion. Next, Monsieur Marceau. Marceau straightened. I have known Mademoiselle Blanchard since childhood and admired her greatly. I supported this engagement because I believed it genuine. I hoped that Desjardins' backing would secure both our families' futures. He glanced toward Dupont. It grieves me that others doubt her virtue. Madame Dupont's lorgnette clattered as she peered across the table. Virtue, she snapped. Elodie was seen leaving Desjardins' private study late one night. Perhaps her virtue extends only to her own advantage. Poirot raised a hand. Madame Dupont, calm yourself. You, too, benefited under the old will. Pray tell us your relationship with your uncle. Dupont cleared her throat. Maurice was all I had after my parents died. I managed the family home on his behalf. I loved him, yet I confess our relationship was at times strained. I objected to his secrecy about this will, but never did I dream it would cost him his life. Mrs. Talbot interjected gently. Madame Dupont cared for him like her own son. She visited his study late on occasion to ensure he dined properly. The housekeeper's eyes flicked toward the doctor as she spoke. Dr. Caldwell inclined his head. I treated Monsieur Desjardins for insomnia and heart palpitations. He confided fears of betrayal, financial misdeeds among those close to him. I advised caution and rest. He offered no more, folding his hands primly. Lady Constance tapped her ivory stick. I travelled abroad on business, but my letter summoned him. I regret that it led him here. Our families had a long-standing financial arrangement, due for renewal. She tilted her head. Perhaps he distrusted me. Sim shifted uneasily. I delivered papers to him that evening, legal documents pertaining to his estate. He instructed me to destroy any draft, wills not bearing his final signature. I complied, unaware of the contents. Leclerc frowned. I saw Monsieur Desjardins walking near the tree that morning when I arrived at Prune. He seemed determined, almost miserable. Our conversation was brief, about the new rose beds, nothing more. Miss Whitfield, at last, cleared her throat. I tutored Mademoiselle Blanchard after dinner. Elodie had letters to practice her French penmanship. She spoke of gratitude toward Desjardins, yet fear for her brother's welfare. Poirot leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Each of you admits presence in the victim's confidence. Each had means, motive, and opportunity. Yet only one, or perhaps more than one, carried out the deed. In our next stage, we shall test these statements against the physical evidence and see contradictions. He tapped his cane. Until then, I ask that no one leave the house or communicate privately with another. We must prevent collusion or destruction of evidence. The little grey cells must work unimpeded. As the suspects exchanged guarded glances, I felt the tension tighten like a noose. Underneath polished facades lay concealed resentments and unspoken debts. Each suspect entwined in a web of motive, and somewhere in this room lay the murderer waiting, perhaps, to strike again. Chapter 4. Poirot drives toward mid-afternoon. The polished corridors of Styles Manor echoed with the tap of Poirot's cane as he made his formal entrance into the drawing-room. Though he had been present earlier at the wishing tree, this marked his official commencement of the investigative phase within the house itself. The suspects, still smarting from the morning's revelations, looked up from their uneasy pacing more. Whispered conversations. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to hush in respect. Poirot paused just inside the door, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the assembled company with those penetrating black eyes. He wore a fresh suit of slate grey, and his conical hat was tilted at a rakish angle. His mustache was immaculately waxed into its twin crescents. For a moment, time itself appeared to hold its breath. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice calm yet carrying through the room. Now that we are all gathered under one roof, I wish to share my first impressions before we delve into the particulars of your statements. The little grey cells, you see, work at their best when all elements are laid bare. He inclined his head politely to each in turn, locking eyes briefly as though reading an invisible script. He turned first to Elodie Blanchard, who sat near the window where shafts of warm sunlight played across her pale blue dress. She sat, rigid, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Yet Poirot noted the tremor in her fingers when they tightened round the fan she held. "Mademoiselle," he said, "your posture bespeaks a woman determined to control every emotion, yet your eyes dart ever so slightly to your left, where Monsieur Marceau sits. There is fear there, fear of accusation, perhaps, but also fear for what may become of you should the truth emerge." Elodie's lips parted in a startled gasp, but she remained silent. Poirot gave her a reassuring half-smile before moving his gaze to Felipe Marceau. The Viscount sat bolt upright, shoulders squared, but Poirot observed the tension in his jaw. "Monsieur Marceau, your composure is admirable, yet your right hand, poised just below the table's edge, clenches and unclenches unconsciously. You wish to project confidence. But the little grey cells see anxiety that goes beyond concern for mademoiselle's reputation. You worry for more than her. I suspect your family's future depends upon her inheritance." Marceau's eyes flickered, the flush rising to his cheeks. He pressed his lips together before looking away. Poirot's gaze swept to Madame Dupont, whose gaze remained fixed on the sheaf of documents before her. "Madame," he said, "you position yourself as the aggrieved heir, yet your breathing is measured, almost calculated. You speak of shock and indignation, but I sense a deeper emotion, not grief, but betrayal. You believed Monsieur Deschardins to be your ally and protector. His new revolts you not merely as a niece disinherited, but as one betrayed in love." Madame Dupont's eyes flashed. She looked up, lips trembling, but did not respond. Poirot nodded almost imperceptibly and turned toward Lady Constance Fitzwilliam. The elderly lady's eyes were steady, but Poirot noticed the slight lift of one eyebrow. "Lady Constance, your tone is cool and distant, yet I detect a flicker of regret in your glance when you meet mine." You summoned Desjardins to the tree, under the guise of business, yet your handwriting on the letter lacked your customary firmness. You hesitated. Why? Because, perhaps, you feared what might transpire at such a clandestine meeting. Lady Constance inclined her head with dignity. Poirot allowed himself a faint twinkle of approval before shifting focus to the man. Mr. Harold Sims, the former footman turned secretary, sat with knees pressed together, hands resting atop them. Sims, Poirot addressed him gently. You are a man who knows the value of discretion. You delivered documents to Monsieur Desjardins that night, and you destroyed others. I detect in you not only loyalty, but also calculation that rewarded you handsomely. Your furtive glances betray gratitude, yes, but also concern for what may become of you if those documents surface. Sim swallowed audibly, his face draining of color. He looked at the floor. Poirot's attention then turned to Dr. Owen Caldwell, whose posture was erect and whose expression remained professionally neutral. Doctor, Poirot said, you have studied the human body for years, learning the signs of distress, the subtle hints of failing health. Yet tonight, your gloved left hand taps upon your thigh in a rhythm no doctor should exhibit in a crisis. You know something about Monsieur Desjardins's condition that you have withheld. You have judged his heart, yet you conceal your own heartbeats. Fear. Dr. Caldwell's mouth twitched, but he gave no reply. Poirot next examined Monsieur Jules Leclerc, the gardener, who rose to his feet upon noticing Poirot's gaze. The gardener's hands were stained with earth, knuckles white from tension. Leclerc, Poirot said softly, you are accustomed to tending life, coaxing growth from seed and root. Yet here you stand, in the shadow of death's work, and your feet shift constantly. Your livelihood was uncertain under Monsieur Desjardins's favor, yet you also appear curious, as though you sought the tree under cover of darkness not only to prune, but perhaps to discover something you were not meant to see. Leclerc's brow furrowed, but he remained silent. Finally, Poirot turned to Miss Clara Whitfield, the governess, who sat poised with a small notebook still in her lap. Her expression was unreadable. Mademoiselle Whitfield, he concluded, you observe children and coax secrets from youthful innocence, yet your notebook hides secrets of your own. You glanced toward Elodie more than once with a look I have seen only in students who resent the object of their tutelage. Perhaps you were writing more than French exercises. Miss Whitfield's dark eyes widened, and she clutched the notebook to her chest. Poirot's face broke into a genial smile. You see, my friends, each of you carries a motive concealed by carefully maintained facades. But facades can crack, and it is my task to observe where the cracks lie. He stepped closer to the center of the room, cane tapping once on the carpet. I have shared my impressions so that you may contemplate your own hearts in due course. I will question each of you individually, testing your words against the reflections of your own conduct. He paused, letting his words sink in, then gave a slight bow. Until the next interview, I ask you to consider what you revealed here, consciously or not. The truth lies in what you allow the little grey cells to discover. As he turned and left the room, the suspects exchanged uneasy glances. The hush that followed was pregnant with unspoken fears. I rose and trailed behind Poirot in silence, marveling at the ease with which he had laid bare the tangled skein of motives. Outside, the sun still shone upon the Manor's Foade, but within its walls, shadows gathered, shadows that only the brilliance of Poirot's intellect could dispel. Chapter 5. Initial interviews began late that afternoon. Poirot and I withdrew to his small, book-lined study for the first round of private interviews. The drawing-room had grown oppressively tense as suspects exchanged furtive glances, each aware that their words and mannerisms might betray them. Better to question one at a time. Poirot decided, so that the little grey cells could savour every nuance of gesture and phrase. I sat quietly beside Poirot's desk, notebook in hand, as he bade our first guest to enter. The polished brass plaque on the door read Monsieur Philippe Marceau, Viscount. With a curt nod, Marceau stepped inside. Closing the door behind him, Poirot gestured to an upholstered chair. Monsieur Marceau, Poirot began, voice gentle. I thank you for joining me. Please speak candidly of your movements and motives concerning last night's events. Marceau cleared his throat and sat, wrists pressed together atop his knee. I told the assembly earlier. I accompanied Mademoiselle Blanchard to her room at 1:30. Beyond that, I retired to the billiard room, where I played until lights out. He offered a polite smile. I heard nothing thereafter until morning. Poirot tapped a pen against his notebook, and the billiard room. Its door faces the east corridor. How long did you remain there? Until I was called to supper at 8:30. Then I returned after midnight. I dare say I remained there until 2. When I grew tired and sought my bed, Marceau's eyes dropped too. The floor. I confess, I left the door slightly ajar. I find fresh air soothing. Did you notice anyone pass your door in that interval? Poirot asked crisply. Marceau hesitated. Perhaps Lady Constance. She and the doctor returned from their walk round 1. But I did not pay close attention. Poirot's moustache twitched. Interesting. And what of your financial situation? Your family estates have long struggled. I understand. Marceau drew in a quick breath. I will not deny it. Yet I love Elodie and believe in our future together. Her inheritance, though unexpected, secures both our families. He sat forward, earnest. I would never harm Monsieur Desjardins. He was like a father to me. Poirot inclined his head. We shall test your words against the evidence, merci, monsieur. He rose, and Marceau departed, leaving the faint scent of his cologne not next. Poirot summoned Madame Antoinette Dupont. She entered with measured steps, eyes ice cold, as she seated herself. Poirot slid a copy of the will across the desk. Madame Dupont, you objected to these provisions vehemently. Tell me, did you ever contemplate contesting the will by other means? Dupont's lip curled. Other means, she repeated. You insinuate foul play. Poirot's gaze was serene. I seek truth only. You had every motive. Your uncle changed his testament at your expense. Did you threaten him? Did you hire someone to persuade him to reconsider? Her cheeks flamed. How dare you? I loved my uncle. I trusted him. Then I learned of this. Injustice. She pressed her fingertips to her temples. Yes, I stormed into his study that night. I demanded an explanation. He refused to listen. I left in tears. Did you follow him to the tree? Poirot inquired softly. Dupont's eyes widened. No. I returned to my suite immediately. Ask Mrs. Talbot she saw me. I shall. Poirot replied. He rose, and Dupont swept out, her skirts brushing the mahogany floor. Our third interview was with Lady Constance Fitzwilliam. She entered, handbag in hand, and settled into the chair as though it were a throne. Lady Constance, your letter summoned Desjardins to the wishing tree. Poirot began. Why did you request that meeting? The elderly lady's eyes flashed. We had financial matters to discuss. Renewal of our family's joint venture. I meant no harm. When I wrote the letter, I believed no one else would find it. She tapped the letter's photograph on the desk. He arrived later than I wished. I did not expect him until dawn. How did you spend the hours before 2? Poirot pressed. I sat in the library, reading business correspondence. Then I retired to take tea in my suite. A footman brought it. I drank half, then felt unwell and sent for Dr. Caldwell. He tended me. She tilted her head. You may confirm that with him? Poirot nodded. Merci. madam. She departed with a graceful curtsy. Dr. Owen Caldwell was our for subject. He entered in crisp etiquette, removing his gloves. Doctor, you treated Desjardins for heart palpitations. Did you prescribe anything that evening? Caldwell cleared his throat. I gave him a mild tincture to calm his nerves. He seemed anxious and surprising. Given his personal affairs, I departed at 11:15. Did he mention any secrets someone he feared or distrusted? The doctor frowned. He spoke of a breach in confidence. He suspected someone close to him of embezzlement. Beyond that, I know nothing, and the sounds of raised voices at midnight. Caldwell paled. I heard nothing. My rooms are distant. He rose. That is all I can offer. He bowed and left. Next came Mr. Harold Sims, who hesitated at the door, lips pressed tight. Poirot gestured him in. Mr. Sims, you handle the estate's legal documents. What did you destroy that night? Sims's face crumpled. Draft Will's older versions that favored Madame Dupont. Desjardins insisted they were outdated. He made me burn them. His voice wavered. I did as he asked. Did you witness the new will being signed? No. He signed it in private. I did not see him afterward. Sims swallowed. I found the sealed copies missing this morning. Thank you. Mr. Sims, Poirot dismissed him. Monsieur Jules Leclerc, the gardener, shuffled in next. Coat still bearing flecks of soil. Leclerc, you walked near the tree at dawn. Why, Leclerc looked down. I come early to prune. That morning I found the cord and footprints. I thought them odd, but did not touch anything until the police arrived. Did you see anyone else? He shook his head. No, sir. Poirot studied him a moment longer. Then nodded. Our final interview was with Miss Clara Whitfield. She entered, quietly, notebook in hand, and sat demurely. Mademoiselle Whitfield, Poirot began. You tutored Mademoiselle Blanchard until 8. What did Elodie say about her uncle? Whitfield hesitated. She spoke of gratitude and anxiety. She feared that others would condemn her for accepting his support. She paused. She also mentioned a secret meeting, but did not say with whom. A meeting at the tree, Poirot said softly. Miss Whitfield nodded. Yes, she intended to meet someone. She did not reveal the name. Poirot closed his notebook. That will suffice for now. As each suspect departed, I observed their pallid faces and the slight tremors in their hands. Each interview had yielded fragments. Marceau's anxious pacing, Dupont's stormy entrance, Constance's business excuse, Caldwell's reticence, Sims's confession of burning documents. Leclerc's quiet presence and Whitfield's withholding of names. Poirot rose and extinguished his lamp. Mon ami, he said, we now possess the bones of a framework. Each suspect has disclosed half-truths, yet none has delivered a full confession. In our next phase, we shall explore contradictions and press further. I closed my notebook, mind worrying with the intricacies of each testimony. Beneath the veneer of polite society, motives tangled like brambles, and though the initial interviews had begun to unravel the mystery, the heart of the crime remained hidden, waiting for the little grey cells to illuminate the final. Chapter 6. The first false lead next morning broke with a brittle clarity, as though the sun itself were eager to expose every secret at Styles Manor. I joined Poirot in the great hall, where Inspector Heathcote stood beside a small table bearing an array of objects displayed like trophies. The suspects assembled behind us, their faces drawn with anticipation and, in some cases, relief. Rumors fluttered through the air. The case was nearly solved. Poirot's expression, however, remained inscrutable. He removed his cane from its hook and approached the table, where Heathcote picked up a slender glass vial. Monsieur Poirot, the inspector announced, we have Our culprit. His voice was triumphant. This morning, Dr. Owen Caldwell's rooms were searched, and we discovered this vial hidden in his medicine chest. It contains a powerful sleep-inducing narcotic on that. When combined with the heart medications he prescribed for Monsieur Desjardins, could prove lethal. He held the vial aloft so that the assembly could see the faintly yellow liquid within. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Dr. Caldwell paled, his professional composure crumbling. "Inspector, I can explain." Heathcote continued without pause. "Moreover, traces of this narcotic were found in the wine glass retrieved from the wishing tree clearing. The pathologist's report confirms minute residues in Monsieur Desjardins's bloodstream, indicating ingestion shortly before death." He turned to the doctor. "You provided him with the tincture, did you not? Yet you substituted this drug in its place." Caldwell swallowed. "I prescribed only a mild sedative, nothing more. I would never harm him." Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Let us consider the facts, Inspector." He regarded the vial thoughtfully. "This substance is indeed potent, and it could explain an unexpected faintness or collapse. Yet our initial examination determined the cause of death to be strangulation, with a garrote. No signs of collapse induced by poisoning were present at the neck, only faint bruising and marks consistent with manual compression." Heathcote hesitated, brow furrowing. The pathologist's full report mentions both poisoning and strangulation. The sequence is unclear. Perhaps the victim was first drugged to render him helpless, then garroted. Elodie Blanchard, standing nearby, clasped her hands to her mouth. "My poor father." He trusted the doctor. Marceau's jaw tightened. Lady Constance's eyes narrowed. Madame Dupont's pale face twisted with satisfaction. The assembly shifted its weight, as though the pendulum of suspicion had finally swung. Poirot beckoned Caldwell to step forward. With slow dignity, the doctor approached the table. Poirot laid a calming hand on his shoulder. "Doctor, did you administer this drug intentionally to Monsieur Desjardins?" Caldwell's voice trembled. "No. I found it among my supplies, a new sedative sample sent by a pharmaceutical firm. I intended to return it with a note of thanks. I did not realize it had been used in Monsieur Desjardins's medicine." His eyes brimmed with genuine distress. "I would never harm him." Heathcote crossed his arms. "Then how did it come to be in his bloodstream?" Poirot crouched to inspect the table further, his gaze lingering on a folded scrap of paper bearing Dr. Caldwell's neat script. "Tests on formula to be returned to firm." Poirot stood and addressed the inspector. "If the narcotic were introduced innocently, it must have been swapped for the genuine tincture elsewhere. Consider the study. Mr. Sims delivered the doctor's prescription to the banker shortly before midnight. Who else could have had access to Dr. Caldwell's bottle?" He turned to Sims, who looked away. Sims's face went white. I did remove the prescription from the bottle on Desjardins's desk, but I returned it directly." "To you, doctor?" Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Yet someone could have intercepted that vial after you left the study. We must discover if the bottle Caldwell returned bore the pharmacist's seal intact." Heathcote frowned. "The seal was broken when we found it, but we assumed the doctor used it." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed. But we must test the theory that this drug was administered accidentally, not maliciously. Meanwhile, the evidence of strangulation remains paramount. As for poisoning, it appears to be a red herring, a carefully planted false lead." A murmur spread among the suspects. Madame Dupont's eyes narrowed with displeasure. Lady Constance bit her lip. Elodie Blanchard sank to a chair, tears brimming in her eyes. Even Marceau appeared unsettled. Heathcote looked at Poirot. "Are you saying we should release Dr. Caldwell?" Poirot met his gaze evenly. "I am saying we must not be hasty. We must test every assumption. The narcotic, though dangerous, does not explain the Garrett marks. The pathologist's primary conclusion was strangulation. Until we can reconcile the two findings, we cannot condemn the doctor. He placed a hand gently on Caldwell's arm. Trust me to ensure your innocence is established if, indeed, you are innocent. Caldwell exhaled in relief. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot turned to the assembly. Now that our false lead is exposed, we must return to the core mystery. Who wielded the garrote, and why was the victim lured beneath the wishing tree? Inspector, may I suggest we re-examine the crime scene for overlooked clues and review each suspect's movements between 11 and 2. Heathcote nodded, regaining his composure. At once, as the suspects were escorted from the hall, I observed the subtle shift in atmosphere. The conviction that the case was solved evaporated like morning mist. Each person returned to their rooms under renewed suspicion. Elodie clung to Marceau's arm. Her earlier composure shattered. Dupont paced her suite, muttering to herself. Lady Constance resumed her embroidery with trembling hands. Sims retreated to his office. Head bowed. Leclerc and Miss Whitfield exchanged anxious glances. I turned to Poirot as the door closed behind the last guest, a masterful uncoupling of truth from deception. Mon ami. He smiled thinly. The first false lead serves to flush the guilty. Those who rejoice in the doctor's plight will reveal themselves when their own relief turns to alarm. He tapped his temple. The little grey cells have much to do. Come. Hastings, the night is waning, but our work is not done together. We left the great hall, the echoes of misplaced certainty trailing behind us. The game had grown more intricate, and the final solution still eluded the bright mind of Hercule Poirot. Yet in that moment, I felt the familiar thrill of pursuit. Each false lead discarded brought us one step closer to the heart of the crime. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut that evening. The grand drawing-room of Styles Manor was transformed into a stage for mind games. Poirot, ever the consummate host of psychological theatre, had ranged a modest gathering only for chairs encircling a small marble-topped table beneath the glow of a single aided lamp. When I arrived, he motioned for me to stand at the back, behind the assembled suspects. Observe, Hastings, he whispered, how a subtler approach may crack even the most polished for Wade. He then invited Lady Constance Fitzwilliam, Monsieur Harold Sims, Elodie Blanchard, and Madame Antoinette Dupont to take their seats. The others were ostensibly engaged elsewhere. Marceau in the billiard room, Caldwell reviewing medical records, Leclerc wandering the estate grounds, and Whitfield in the library. As the four took their places, Poirot sat opposite them, the little grey cells already humming with anticipation. He began casually, Mesdames et messieurs, let us play a humble game of memories and motives. I shall recount to you snippets of what occurred last night, and you will correct me where I err. No need for formalities, this is but a conversation among friends. He smiled, folding his hands. The effect was disarming. First, he intoned, Mademoiselle Blanchard, you slipped from your room at precisely 1:30 to meet someone beneath the wishing tree. Your brother, Monsieur Marceau, escorted you partway, yet you arrived alone. Pray tell, what stirred you to such secrecy? Elodie's cheeks fluttered pink. She held her fan before her mouth. Monsieur insisted on privacy, for reasons too personal to share with the household. Poirot leaned forward. Personal reasons are often the surest mask for duplicity. Yet I wonder if your motives were innocent. Why a silk handkerchief monogrammed with your initials but left behind? Surely one who acts in earnest would take care not to surrender a token so revealing. Elodie's fan wavered in her grip. She swallowed, glancing at Dupont. I dropped it by accident in my haste. Madame Dupont's lip curled. Poirot allowed her a momentary scowl before addressing her. Madame Dupont, you arrived in Styles Manor only hours before your uncle's will changed. You claimed indignation. Yet you possessed a motive intertwining familial affection and financial necessity. Tell me when you stormed into his study that night. What precise words passed between you? Did you beg, scold, or threaten? Dupont's fingers clenched the edge of her seat. I demanded an explanation. He refused. That is all. Is it? Poirot tapped his cane delicately. Forgive my persistence. But the housekeeper, Madame Talbot, heard raised voices round midnight, not at 1:30. There is a gap in your timeline. Where were you between 12 and 1? Dupont's face blanched. She glanced at Lady Constance, only to see that the elderly lady's gaze was fixed upon her with thinly veiled amusement. Dupont's eyes flicked back to Poirot. I was in the conservatory, inspecting the azaleas. An unusual hour for horticultural pursuits, Poirot observed, inclining his head. Yet no gardener saw you there. Curious. He turned to Sims, whose dark eyes darted with growing unease. Mr. Sims, you handled your employer's most sensitive documents, draft wills, final codicils, sealed letters. You burned the old drafts in the office stove, yet not a trace of them survives. Explain to us how one so careful could so thoroughly obliterate the very evidence that might confirm your loyalty. Sims swallowed loudly, glancing at Dupont. Then, at Lady Constance, I did my duty. My only concern was to follow Monsieur Deschardins's instructions. Indeed, Poirot said, voice gentle, but instructions can be given or taken away, depending on one's proximity to the dying man. You were seated beside him as he changed his will. Did you witness the signing? Sims's face twitched. His hands fumbled in his lap. No, he said at last. Voice trembling, he asked for privacy. Poirot folded his hands, turning his gaze to Lady Constance, who inclined her head as though expecting this moment. Lady Fitzwilliam. You summoned the victim under the pretext of business, yet your own correspondence suggested hesitation. You wrote, "Bring only what you must," a phrase that speaks of caution. What was on your mind when you penned those words? Lady Constance's fine features remained composed, but her right hand tapped the armrest in a rapid staccato. I wished to renegotiate our family's partnership quietly. I did not anticipate that the meeting would end in tragedy. Yet you hesitated to reveal that you summoned him in secret. Poirot said softly. That hesitation saved you from immediate suspicion. But it cannot bury the memory of your summons. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Then he directed his attention back to Elodie. Mademoiselle, when you found the locket in the soil, why did you not claim it? It belonged once to your mother, or so you said. Yet you left it from Monsieur Deschardins's body to keep company in death. Tears glistened in Elodie's eyes. I was frightened. She whispered, I thought it might implicate me further. Sincere fear, Poirot observed, but perhaps also calculated caution. He withdrew a single glove and placed it on the table. This glove, found near the garden path, bears the imprint of the pruning hook's handle. Its size matches the gardener's hand, Monsieur Leclerc's, but it is not made for a pruning. Rather, it resembles those one wears to handle delicate objects. A glove such as this could conceal a garret. At this pronouncement, Dupont gasped, Sims paled, Lady Constance's tapping halted, and Elodie drew a sharp breath. Sims leaned forward, voice quavering. You must be mistaken. Leclerc is a simple man. He loves the roses, Poirot allowed. A small smile. But murder loves no roses, and yet I did not place this glove here to accuse Monsieur Leclerc. I placed it here to observe your reactions. Notice how each of you shifted in your seat, save one. He let his gaze travel round the circle. landing on DuPont. Her eyes widened. Her mouth worked. But she said nothing. The others recovered their composure more quickly, shifting focus to one another in an unspoken pact of shared suspicion. Poirot tapped the table. "Ms. Amos, this parlor game reveals more than words. It reveals the tremor of guilt and the flicker of relief. Those who reacted most strongly have yet to answer for their movements between the hours of midnight and 2. I shall next examine your alibis in finer detail, drawing on the clues each of you inadvertently confirmed tonight." He rose, straightened his tie, and replaced his glove. "Until tomorrow. Reflect on your truths and your falsehoods. The little grey cells shall resume their work at first light." As the four departed, each with an expression of dawning apprehension, I caught Poirot's satisfied smile. The psychological game was underway, and already fractures had appeared in the carefully constructed narratives. Somewhere in those cracks lay the path to the real culprit, and Poirot's mind was poised to follow it to its grim conclusion. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery morning light streamed into the oak panel drawing room, where Poirot had summoned the household for a demonstration of his progress. The long table was set for coffee and tea, delicate china arranged in neat rows, and the silver tray held a single document under glass, the most recent copy of Maurice Desjardins' will, exhumed from Inspector Heathcote's evidence room. The air crackled with anticipation. Each suspect seemed eager to see how the pieces would be laid before them. Poirot stood beside the tray, cane in hand, moustache bristling with expectation. "Mesdames et messieurs," he called, "before we proceed to our questioning this morning, I wish to show you that clarity emerges from the fog of confusion." He tapped the glass case containing the will. "Here is the document that set our tragedy in motion. Note its margins, for they bear the banker's fine emendations." He lifted the tray and approached Elodie Blanchard. "Mademoiselle, observe the delicate corrections here, dated 2 days ago. This will names you sole heir. No doubt you recall its acceptance." Elodie leaned in, eyes fixed on the parchment. "Yes," she whispered. "I scarcely dared to hope." Poirot nodded gravely. "Yet I must warn you all. This document is but a fragile witness. Guard it well." He returned the tray to the table, then stepped back as Lady Constance Fitzwilliam entered with tea. Steam curled from the silver pot as she poured, her gloved hand steady. Each suspect accepted a cup, marking a brief ceasefire in the silent war of suspicion. Mrs. Talbot served petite pastries, and the room relaxed, exchanging polite murmurs about the morning's reveal. Even Inspector Heathcote allowed himself a small smile, as though congratulating Poirot on outmanoeuvring the earlier false lead. But at the edge of the room, Madame Antoinette Dupont's nostrils flared. She raised her cup to her lips, paused, then set it down with a trembling hand. Her face blanched. "Something tastes odd." Before anyone could react, she clutched at her throat and collapsed onto the Persian rug with a sharp gasp. Chairs scraped back as guests rushed forward. Poirot knelt beside her, lifting her wrist to find her weak pulse. "Call Dr. Caldwell." He ordered Dot in an instant. Dr. Owen Caldwell knelt by Dupont's side, producing a smelling salt vial from his coat pocket and holding it beneath her nose. She stirred, eyes fluttering open, and the doctor supported her to a sitting position. "She's alive," he announced. "Some irritant, perhaps an overdose of the sedative tincture. I must take her to my surgery at once." Marceau knelt to help Dupont to her feet, while Elodie trembled at the doorway. Lady Constance pressed a handkerchief to Dupont's lips, her face drawn with concern. Sims hovered anxiously by the door, and Miss Whitfield's notebook fell forgotten from her lap. Poirot rose, brushing a speck of lint from his sleeve. He surveyed the assembly with solemn gravity. "Ms. Amos, it appears we have more than one mystery this day. Madame Dupont's collapse suggests a deliberate attempt to poison or at least incapacitate her. And yet the glass from which she sipped bears no residue of the narcotic we discussed yesterday. He pointed to the empty cup Dupont had abandoned. Inspector, have the cup sent for analysis. He turned to the table and lifted the glass case containing the will. And now I find that our primary document, Monsieur Deschardins's will, has vanished. A collective gasp filled the room. Lady Constance set her own cup trembling on the saucer. Sims's eyes widened. Elodie clutched Marceau's arm. Inspector Heathcote strode to the table and lifted the glass cover. By Jove! He's right, there's nothing here. Poirot placed a calming hand on the inspector's arm. We must treat these events as interconnected. Who stood to benefit from Madame Dupont's incapacitation, and who had the nerve to steal the will? Under the noses of the household, he looked at each suspect in turn. Let us recall who might have seized an opportunity. The attempt on Dupont's safety occurred at the moment all eyes were on the will. The thief knew that attention would be directed elsewhere. Marceau's face flushed with indignation. Monsieur Poirot, this is absurd, this is nothing but theatrics. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps, yet consider the facts. The will disappeared within seconds. Replaced by empty air. Only those nearest. The table hand seized by either relief or alarm could have executed this sleight of hand. He swept his gaze across the group. Elodie standing nearest the tray, Lady Constance hovering behind the teapot, Sims close to the door, Miss Whitfield seated closest to the sofa. He then fixed his eyes on Dr. Caldwell, who had just returned from assisting Dupont. Doctor, where were you when she collapsed? Caldwell straightened his coat. MME, Dupont seized my tincture vial. It slipped from her hand onto the rug. I had turned to secure the quiet corner for our recovery. And did you notice anyone else near the tray? Poirot pressed. The doctor shook his head. No, I was focused on the patient. Poirot turned to Lady Constance. Madam, your gloved hand poured the tea. Did you examine the cup before serving? She offered a small curtsy. I did. The tea was prepared by Mrs. Talbot and boiled afresh. I merely poured it. Would never occur to me to tamper with it. He then addressed Elodie. Mademoiselle, you took your seat nearest the window, behind the table. You could have reached for the tray unnoticed. Elodie's breath trembled. I would never. I moved away to let Madame Dupont have the seat of honor. Poirot nodded slowly, acknowledging her protest. Your gesture was commendable, yet commendation is not proof. We shall test your alibi. He turned to Sims. Mr. Sims, you handle documents for your employer. Would you risk theft of such a precious paper to curry favor with an heir? Sims's hands clenched. This is preposterous. Poirot allowed the moment to linger. Then he withdrew a small key from his waistcoat pocket and held it aloft. Fortunately, I retained the original key to Inspector Heathcote's evidence. Box, I shall unlock it in front of us all. The inspector handed him the key, and Poirot placed it in the lock at the foot of the table's display case. With a soft click, the lock yielded. He lifted the glass cover, but the tray lay empty. Not so much as a scrap of parchment remained. Poirot looked up, eyes shining. Mon Nemes, our secondary mystery has just begun. We have an attempt at poisoning, and the disappearance of a will, each a deliberate act to deceive. The murderer has evolved into a thief and attempted poisoner. Or perhaps an accomplice has joined the deadly dance. In either case, we must retrace our steps. He turned to Inspector Heathcote. Please secure the drawing room. No one is to leave. I shall reconstruct the sequence of events leading to these twin crimes, as the suspects were ushered from the chamber. I caught Poirot's thoughtful frown. Beneath the veneer of genteel calamities lay deeper deceptions. Still, and as the great hall door closed behind the last of them, I realized our investigation had taken a perilous turn. The game now involved not only murder, but theft and attempted murder moves that would test even Poirot's legendary skill too. Its limits. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. Late that afternoon, Poirot summoned us once more to the open-L drawing room, its cuirass of silence belying the storm of revelations to come. The great windows were thrown open, letting in cool air that rustled the heavy draperies and perhaps, Poirot hinted, rustled the hidden truths in each heart. Each suspect took a seat round the long mahogany table, eyes wary, shoulders tense. Inspector Heathcote stood nearby, pen poised over his notebook, ready to record any new discoveries. Poirot began quietly, his voice measured. Mesdames et messieurs, in the course of our investigation, certain links have come to light, threads that bind you together in ways beyond your daily interactions. It is in these hidden connections that the motive for Monsieur Deschardins's death and the subsequent mischief may be found. He turned first to Miss Clara Whitfield. Mademoiselle, your role as governess granted you unusual access to personal letters and household secrets. I have discovered a letter in your handwriting, dated a fortnight ago, addressed not to your employer but to Monsieur Sims. He held up a neatly folded note. Your generosity has not gone unnoticed. I remain your most grateful friend. C.W. Whitfield's face drained of color. I wrote to thank him for his donation to the orphanage in my name. She stammered. I had no other motive. Sims, seated across from her, flushed angrily. You use my name without permission. I gave only a token gift. He glowered. Do you suppose I would murder for charity? Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps not for a charity, but for leverage. Monsieur Sims, you handle the banker's most intimate affairs. You erased and burned wills. You guided his hand in exchange. Mademoiselle Whitfield received your largesse and perhaps your silence. He tapped the letter. Tell me, why did you send this money? And why keep the correspondence secret? Before Sims could answer, Poirot turned to Dr. Owen Caldwell. Doctor, your prescription records indicate to unexpected visits to Monsieur Deschardins's study, one on the night of his death, and another the night before. Yet you reported only the latter. I have here a receipt, signed by Monsieur Deschardins, for a private consultation at midnight the previous week. He waved a small scrap of paper. What was discussed at that hour? Caldwell's lips pressed. Then, a family matter, a confidential revision. He feared that Madame Dupont might contest his intentions. Poirot murmured. So you advised him on legal and, perhaps, emotional matters, yet witnesses place you in the billiard room at 1:30 the night of the murder. He paused to let the contradiction sink in. Which account is true? Caldwell swallowed. Both. I left the billiard room briefly to deliver a tincture, then returned. Poirot nodded slowly. An explanation possible yet convenient. We shall verify your timeline next. Poirot folded his hands and addressed Lady Constance Fitzwilliam. Your business travels and your letter to the banker were well known. Yet I found in his papers a second letter from you, unopened, dated 3 days before his death, expressing regret at an unpaid debt. You owed him how much? The elderly lady's composure faltered. She glanced at the table. I owed him nothing. That letter was a draft, never sent, Poirot said softly. And yet his records show a transfer of £500 from your estate into his account 2 days ago. He produced a bank acknowledgement. This, too. You did not mention. Lady Constance's hand shook as she folded her gloves. I paid my debts. Our family's partnership required it. Indeed, Poirot conceded. But such payments can be purchased with gratitude or with fear. Turning to Monsieur Jules Leclerc, the gardener, Poirot picked up a small trowel from The table. This instrument was found between the study and the trio borrowed tool. Judging by the initials J.L., why did the banker allow you to prune his private grounds at night? Leclerc's face darkened. He suspected someone was stealing seedlings. I volunteered to guard the estate after hours. Yet your nightly patrols would also grant you the chance to meet anyone you chose or to hide something beneath the soil. Poirot tapped the trowel. The locket, the wool fragments, the cord. They could have been buried here intentionally. Leclerc's gaze dropped. I only tended the roses. Poirot's eyes glittered. Roses need tending, but prying hands need concealment. Finally, Poirot regarded Madame Antoinette Dupont and Felipe Marceau together. You to share more than a squabble over inheritance. I discovered that before their engagement, Mademoiselle Blanchard received a series of tuition payments routed through Madame Dupont, payments of £300 each. He looked at Dupont. Your niece's education was financed by the very assets you claim he stole. Dupont pressed her lips together. I believed the funds were a loan, to be repaid. Marceau scowled. I arranged those payments. My family owed debts. I hoped to secure Elodie's future. Yet the banker's ledgers show those payments labeled family secret. He feared your niece would discover a scandal. Poirot leaned back. Whatever that secret may be, it connected all of you. Money laundered through marriage prospects, clandestine meetings under the tree, forged letters, hidden consultations. He rose, tapping his cane. These associations, financial, personal, even romantic, illuminate motives, betrayal in business, betrayal in love, betrayal of trust, and in that web, murder was born. He turned to Inspector Heathcote. We have unraveled threads linking every suspect to the victim's deepest concerns. His will, his health, his estate, even his heart. Our next step is to isolate which of these connections led to the fatal act and which served only to mislead. As the assembly broke into hushed speculation, I saw in each pair of eyes the flicker of fear, fear of exposure, fear of justice, fear of what Poirot's next move would reveal. The hidden connections had been laid bare, and with them, the growing certainty that the killer was not an isolated figure, but the center of a tangled network of secret debts and concealed desires. And at the heart of that network lay a truth, too cunning for any ordinary mind, yet perhaps not too cunning for the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue that evening, long after the household had retired. Poirot tapped lightly at my door. Hastings. He called in a low voice. I require your presence at the Wishing Tree clearing. There is a detail I overlooked in daylight. Wrapped against the chill, I followed him through moonlit gardens to the spot where Maurice Desjardins had met his end. The yellow police tape lay slack, and the torn scarlet scarf and crushed handkerchief lay under glass once more. Poirot knelt in the soft earth, beckoning me closer. Mon ami, observe these footprints again. He swept aside the soil to expose two distinct tracks, one sturdy boot tread, one delicate slip heel. We assumed the boot prints belonged to the banker or his assailant. Yet this morning I noticed something odd. He retrieved a small ruler from his coat pocket and measured the depth of imprint. The right boot print is deeper by exactly 5 millimeters, a heavier weight on one side and likely formed by a balanced pair. He tapped one print. Now the left boot somewhat shallower, consistent with a worn sole. The right, however, bears a fresh. On one edge I frown. So the boots were mismatched precisely. One shoe fresh, one shoe worn. Such a discrepancy rises only when one borrows a single boot or replaces a worn sole with a new one. He glanced round, eyes alight. Monsieur Leclerc's brogues are always maintained as a matched pair. I inspected them earlier, both soles worn evenly. These prints do not match his boots. I bent to examine the glass-covered scarf again. So someone planted the scarf to implicate Deschardins himself or the gardener. Poirot replaced the ruler. A crafty misdirection. But the true culprit left this clue by accident, a mismatched footprint. The murderer wore one of Leclerc's boots, swapping only one shoe to disguise his own tread. He stood brushing, sole from his gloves. Who among us has access to the gardener's lodge and motive to frame an innocent man? I shivered in the moonlight. Anyone could slip in, Marceau perhaps, or Sims, or even Dupont. Yet only one would think to borrow a boot rather than the whole pair. And only one has the dexterity to conceal such a plan. Poirot returned his gaze to the clearing. But there is more. He swept aside a fallen oak leaf to reveal a single black thread caught on the locket's clasp mount to fine for the gardener's coarse jacket, and to dark Frailty's pale gowns. I peered at the fibre, silk perhaps from a formal suit. Exactly. A luxurious silk lining, perhaps from a cocktail jet. He pressed a gloved finger to the thread and held it to the moonlight. This fibre matches the lining of Monsieur Marceau's evening coat, the one he wore to the billiard room. He nodded slowly. He left these prints, and this strand, unwittingly. He must have slipped away from his alibi, borrowed Leclerc's boot, and crept here in darkness, planting evidence to implicate others. I gasped. Marceau. But he loves. A Lodi. Poirot's gaze was grave. Love can twist into jealousy. Hastings. Yet we must confirm. Let us return to the manor. There is one more test to conduct. Back in the bow-windowed entrance hall, Poirot instructed me to place the thread and boot measurements on a tray. He then sent for Inspector Heathcote and the suspects. Under the pretext of reviewing the cleared scene, as the suspects assembled, Poirot produced a sheet of paper bearing precise footprints and my transcription of the silk fibre. He began with silence, letting the tension grow. Then he spoke. Mesdames et messieurs, I have revisited the crime scene under the cloak of night and discovered a crucial inconsistency, one that reshapes our understanding. He laid the footprints drawing atop the tray. These prints do not match the evidence of Mr. Leclerc's boots. Rather, they correspond to a mismatched pair one knew soul. One worn. Who among you borrowed the gardener's shoe? Gasps rippled through the group. Leclerc straightened, eyes blazing. I never left my lodge. Poirot nodded. Indeed. One need not enter his lodge. One needed only the soft earth near the tree. He lifted the silk thread. And this fibre black silk from a gentleman's evening coat was found on the locket clasp. Only one of you arrived in evening dress that night and left the billiard room unobserved. All eyes turned to Felipe Marceau. He staggered back, face ashen. You accuse me. Poirot allowed the silence to press against Marceau's shoulders. Then he continued, I do not yet accuse, monsieur. I present observations. You said you remained in the billiard room until 2. But you wore this coat, then one that bears this lining. You left the door ajar, permitting your departure unnoticed. Marceau's jaw worked. He glanced at the others pleadingly. Poirot raised a hand. Time is required to confirm these findings, but the little grey cells have spoken of footprints and fibres. Our next step is to examine the soles of each suspect's boots and the linings of their coats. While we await these confirmations, consider your words carefully. Monsieur Marceau. He turned to the inspector. Please secure a boot and coat inspection, and Mon ami Hastings. Let us re-examine the timelines to ensure no one else could match these prints. Marceau's shoulders sagged. He lowered his gaze, palms trembling. The other suspects exchanged startled glances, some with relief that poison and forgery were momentarily forgotten, others with dawning alarm at the new direction. As the assembly dispersed under Heathcote's instructions, I whispered to Poirot, This clue so precise and yet so easily missed will unmask him. Poirot smiled faintly, his mustache bristling. Perhaps Hastings, but one must never rely on a single clue. We shall corroborate, observe reactions, and then reveal the truth when the time is right. Under the hush of the night, the stage was set for the final acts. The hidden culprit or culprits stood exposed by a solitary footprint and a single strand of silk. Yet the curtain had not yet fallen, and in the little gris cells of Hercule Poirot, the resolution gleamed with inexorable clarity. Chapter 11. Tensions risen following morning. The mood at Styles Manor had turned electric. Word of Monsieur Marceau's implication in last night's midnight reconnaissance spread through the corridors like wildfire. I found Poirot in the library, seated beside the fire, reviewing dossiers of statements. His little grey cells were hard at work, but even he looked wearied by the mounting tension. "Mon ami," he said as I entered, "today the undercurrents will serve us. Let the storm break in the chaos." Truths emerge, as promised. The suspects gathered in the drawing-room for the scheduled boot and coat inspection. Inspector Heathcote presided over the proceedings, boots laid on a low table and coats hung upon hooks. Each suspect stepped forward into enemy. Dupont, Lady Constance, Dr. Caldwell, Mr. Sims, MME, Blanchard, Mole, Whitfield, and finally Muntz, Leclerc, while Poirot and Heathcote examined soles from mismatched treads and linings for the telltale black silk. When Philippe Marceau approached, his face was drawn, his shoulders slumped. He removed one boot, then the other. The left bore a worn sole, the right brand new. A murmur rippled through the room. Without a word, Marceau unclasped his coat inside. The lining was that same black silk. A gasp of confirmation echoed. Lady Constance's hand flew to her mouth. Dupont's eyes glittered with triumph. Marceau's lips quivered. Poirot rose, his cane tapping the floor. "The evidence stands, yet I counsel patience before we pronounce judgment." He held up a gloved hand for a culprit who planned so carefully. He would not have left such obvious clues unless he intended them for discovery. Before anyone could respond, a Lady Blanchard spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "Monsieur Marceau, why? You loved me. Why would you attempt to frame me? Frame Leclerc, frame us all." Marceau's head snapped up. "Love is not always rational. Mademoiselle." His words struck the hush like flint on steel. "I loved you. Yes, but I also feared that your inheritance would vanish into debts and foolish ventures that would ruin us both. I wanted to frighten you, to prove his betrayal, to protect you from a future I could not control." Dupont rose, her skirts rustling. "So you would kill a man you called family to manipulate a woman's emotions. You confess to malice, monsieur, yet you deny murder." Marceau shook his head. "I never meant for him to die. I wanted scandal, not death. The cord was to threaten, not to strangle." But when he resisted, his voice faltered. I lost control. A collective gasp ensued. Dr. Caldwell stepped forward, anger flaring in his eyes. "You condemn yourself. Viscount, confess now, and spare us further cruelty." Marceau turned on him. "And you, doctor, you who tampered with his medicine, do you think that frees you from suspicion?" Suddenly the room erupted. Sims shouted, "Enough of your theatrics," and hurled his consultation notes at the hearth. Lady Constance cried, "This is madness," as she clutched her pearls. "MME." Dupont's face twisted with rage and grief. Even Miss Whitfield stood, notebook clenched, her calm weight shattered. Poirot raised both hands, silencing them like a maestro. "Messieurs, mesdames, calm yourselves." His voice, though soft, carried an authority that stilled the tumult. We are not here to indulge mutual recrimination, but to seek the truth. He pointed to Marceau. Monsieur, you have admitted to tampering with footprints and the scarf. That aligns with our night-time discovery. Yet the question remains, who garroted Monsieur Desjardins, and why? Marceau's shoulders sagged. I found him already strangled. I swear I did not apply the cord, Elodie gasped, horror coursing through her. Then someone else, someone with a keener will to kill. Dupont's lip curled. Dr. Caldwell. You claimed ignorance of the narcotic in Desjardins's wine, but were you present at the wishing tree to administer the cord? Caldwell's eyes narrowed. I was in the billiard room until past 1. I have no motive to kill him, only to treat him. Your callous suspicion is unwarranted. Heathcote cleared his throat. Perhaps we should re-examine the timeline. He tapped his notebook. Marceau left the billiard room at 1:45. Caldwell arrived to treat Lady Constance's headache at 2. Elodie was seen returning to her suite at 1:35. The doctor admitted a brief trip to Desjardins's study at midnight. The only unaccounted moments belonged to Miss Whitfield. All eyes turned on the governess. She stood frozen, trapped in the spotlight. Poirot leaned forward. Mademoiselle. You tutored Mademoiselle Blanchard in the early evening, yet your night-time movements were unrecorded. What were you doing between midnight and 2? Whitfield's voice was barely audible. I walked in the gardens. I could not sleep. I did not see anything, just the moonlight on the roses. Dupont rose, a convenient alibi for wandering near the scene of the crime. Lady Constance sniffed. Your notebook contained no mention of your stroll. Whitfield's eyes filled with tears. I tore out the page. It spoke of letters I wrote to Monsieur Sims, and I feared it would implicate him further. I did not mean to hide evidence of murder. Marceau shook his head. So you watched and did nothing. The governor sank into a chair. I was afraid. Silence fell, heavy and charged. Poirot watched them coolly, steepling his fingers. You see, he said softly, fear can be as binding as guilt, yet it is not proof of murder. He turned to Heathcote. Inspector, have the timeline verified again, focusing on the brief windows each suspect occupies. Only by narrowing those gaps can we determine who had the opportunity to apply the Garrett. He faced the suspects. For now, you may disperse, but know that Averia and Deer will remain vigilant. In these tensions, alliances will form and betrayals will follow. As the group broke apart, some lingering in whispered alliances, others retreating to solitude. I felt the manor tremble on the brink of revelation, poison, theft, threats. And now open accusations. The tapestry of intrigue had become a knot of suspicion. Yet in the midst of the storm, Poirot's little grey cells continued to turn, sifting through emotion and deception toward the single thread that would unravel the crime. And I sensed that, despite the chaos, the final act would soon be upon us. Chapter 12. The confrontation lit that afternoon. Poirot summoned Dr. Owen Caldwell to his book-lined study. The hour was hushed, the fading light casting long shadows across the leather armchairs. Caldwell entered with cautious steps, removing his gloves and placing them neatly on a side table. As though offering a symbol of honesty, Poirot sat behind his desk, expression inscrutable, the little grey cells already sparking with purpose. Doctor, Poirot began in a measured tone. You have assured us repeatedly that your ministrations were purely professional, that you did not intend harm when Monsieur Desjardins ingested the illicit substance. Yet I have discovered a detail that contradicts even your own account. Caldwell's throat bobbed. Monsieur Poirot, I have been straightforward. Indeed, Poirot interrupted gently. You have been admirably forthright about treatments and tinctures. But you claimed ignorance of the summons letter that Lord Desjardins to the Wishing Tree. You insisted it was penned by Lady Constance Fitzwilliam and delivered by Monsieur Sims. Poirot leaned forward, placing a worn sheet of paper on the desk. Yet notice this phrase, prens gardis quaninus voi pause. Poor French for be careful not to be seen. The phrasing betrays a non-native speaker. Lady Constance, I remind you, speaks impeccable French. Her letters bear none of these awkward constructions. Caldwell's eyes darted to the paper. I do not know French well. Poirot's gaze sharpened. But you wrote it. Not Lady Constance, but you, Dr. Caldwell. You forged her handwriting, and sent Axtelaw Monsieur Desjardins away from prying eyes so you could administer your drug without interruption. The doctor's composure wavered. He stood, clutching the back of a chair. Monsieur Poirot, you mistake my intent. I wrote drafts for clients in French from time to time. The pharmacy requested a translation of instructions for the firm. That letter was a translation exercise. Poirot nodded slowly. A plausible excuse if your pharmacy doled out draft correspondence to physicians. Yet the hospital records show no such request. Moreover, the paper bears the watermark of Styles Manor Stationery, not the pharmacy's headed sheets. You penned this under Desjardins's roof. With his materials, Caldwell's face drained of colour. He sank into Poirot's chair, voice barely a whisper. Yes, I wrote it, but it was meant only to bring him to the tree, to confront him. I suspected he planned to change his will again, leaving clear stipulations that might harm my future practice. He paused, as though struggling for breath. Poirot lowered his eyes, letting the silence weigh heavily. Then he spoke quietly. You have motive fear of financial ruin and opportunity, having delivered Lady Constance's message to him at midnight. Yet you maintained you never touched the garret. Tell me, Doctor, why did you leave the cord by the tree? Caldwell's shoulders shook. I intended only to frighten him. I meant to show him his betrayal of trust, to force him to reconsider. The drug would render impact. The sight of the cord his own design, a ceremonial restraint used in my research on ancient medical devices, would shock him into confessing. I never intended to strangle him, yet strangled he was. Poirot murmured, your chemical would have incapacitated him, but it did not kill. The cord did. After your potion took hold, someone we resolved to kill used your trap to finish the deed. That was not you. Caldwell looked up, tears in his eyes. No, I did not kill him. I returned to my quarters to tend to Lady Constance's headache. I never saw him again. Poirot studied his face, then placed a gentle hand on his arm. You acted rashly, Doctor, but not with murderous intent. Your greatest mistake was forging that letter, an act you believed would force a confession, but which only deepened the darkness. Caldwell bowed his head. I confessed to the letter, to the drug, even to the card's placement, but not to murder. Poirot nodded, and in confessing these, you clear yourself of the greater crime. For only one among us possessed both motive and the cold determination to use that garret to kill. We must now turn our attention to that person who used your tools and your deception for murder, hoping you would bear the blame. With careful deliberation, Poirot produced a folded fragment of parchment, an extract from the banker's personal notebook, recovered this morning from a hidden drawer. The notebook page detailed a clandestine meeting. Midnight confirmed with HS that funds have been diverted. Meet at tree. He looked up at Caldwell. HS Harold Sims. He alone had both the access to your prescription and the motive to silence Desjardins permanently, for fear the banker's reforms would expose his misappropriations. Caldwell's eyes widened. Sims, he loved money more than duty. Poirot rose, cane tapping the floor. Dr. Caldwell, you will be cleared. Inspector Heathcote, we have our culprit. The final act awaits. As the door closed behind Caldwell, Poirot turned to me. Mon ami, the tiger is cornered. But one must never let haste mar the denouement. We shall gather all suspects further. Reconstruction tomorrow, and then reveal the truth in full. Outside, the wind rustled the ancient oaks, as if heralding the end of the mystery. And within the quiet study, Hercule Poirot's little grey cells gleamed with anticipation of the grand reveal that would bring justice at last. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape deep into the night. Sleep fled Styles Manor. The corridors lay shrouded in shadow as Poirot and I patrolled discreetly, awaiting the hour when Monsieur Harold Sims would receive the summons to face Inspector Heathcote's final questioning. The doctor's confession had cleared one suspect, Dr. Caldwell, and now all eyes turned toward Sims. I noted the flicker of lantern light through windows as we passed. The quiet murmur of staff prepared for an early inquiry at 2 o'clock. A soft rap sounded upon the door of Sims's quarters. Poirot paused, listening. He arrives, he whispered. Be ready. Inside, the footman-turned-secretary stood by his writing desk, face drawn, clutching a packet of papers that glowed pale in the lantern's light. The note in his hand read, "Attend the library for a final questioning, at once," as Sims crossed the threshold. Stepping into the corridor, Poirot and I emerged from the shadows. Sims started, colour draining from his cheeks. "Monsieur Poirot, Hastings," he stammered. "I have nothing to hide." Poirot's eyes were solemn. "Monsieur Sims, the time has come to account for your actions." His voice carried the quiet authority of inevitability. Sims pressed the papers to his chest. "Then I shall see the inspector at once." He moved briskly toward the library door. "You will do no such thing," Poirot said, stepping before him. "You have destroyed evidence before now you seek to flee." Panic flickered across Sims's face. He threw the papers onto the floor and bolted for the servants' passage that led to the stables. His footsteps rang against the stone floor. "Hastings," Poirot called after him quietly. We raced down the corridor. I gripped Poirot's elbow as he raised his cane. "There are guards at every exit," he noted, though his voice was low, urgent. "But he may slip through the underground tunnels at the stairwell." We caught a glimpse of Sims's dark figure vanishing into a narrow archway. We pursued, minds aflame with the knowledge that capture was essential not only to justice but to the safety of witnesses. For if Sims escaped, the banker's final will and Caldwell's confession would vanish with him buried by greedy hands, turning a corner. I saw Sims rifling through the packet he'd dropped, a sheaf of Desjardins' personal account, letters, legal documents, and a letter bearing his own handwriting. He thrust them into a small cupboard beneath the stairs. Poirot and I arrived at that doorway. Breathless. "Stop," Poirot commanded. Sims snapped the cupboard shut and turned, breathing heavily. "You will not find what you seek here." I examined the latch. "He hides evidence, perhaps the original will." Sims squared his shoulders. "Panic hardening to defiance, you think you have me, but you lack proof." He reached inside his jacket. "I will not go back to that den of inquisition." Poirot's little grey cells word. "You wish to escape the law-wrought labyrinth, but you cannot escape the truth." He stepped forward, cane extended. "Hand over those documents." Fury and fear were in Sims's eyes. He lunged for the door handle, but Poirot anticipated the move. One fluid twist of his cane and the door was barred. Sims hissed, stepping back. "You dare confine me. I confine no man unjustly." Poirot replied, voice steely. "You confined your employer to his fate by forging letters, tampering with medicine, and drafting instructions for his demise. Now you shall account for your conspiracy." Sims turned, eyes dotting a fatal mistake. Poirot's gaze caught the glint of steel in Sims's hand, a slender pruning hook blade stolen from Leclerc's lodge. Used to sever the cord and now reimagined as a weapon. Sims raised it, trembling. "Come no closer," he spat. "I will defend myself." Poirot's face softened. "Monsieur Sims, there is still honor in surrender if you choose it." He sank into a gentle, but unmovable stance, holding Sims's gaze. In that moment, footsteps echoed from the main floor. Inspector Heathcote and two constables arrived, lanterns raised. Sims's defiance wavered when he saw their uniforms. He hesitated, blade quivering. "Drop it," Heathcote commanded. "Peace, Sims, your resistance only deepens your disgrace." With a strangled cry, Sims let the blade clatter to the floor and dropped to his knees, hands raised. "I am undone," he whispered. Poirot nodded. "Merci, Inspector. Monsieur Sims shall accompany you. But first, we retrieve the hidden evidence." He pointed to the cupboard. The inspector pried it open to reveal the scattered documents, including the long-lost original will, Burgess's emendations, and Caldwell's medical notes. Heathcote pocketed the will. "This settles the inheritance, and these," he nodded at the medical notes, "confirm our doctor's limited culpability." Poirot turned to Sims as the constables bound his wrists with gentle firmness. "You sought to escape retribution, monsieur, but retribution is not hateful, it is necessary." His eyes held no malice, only the justice of immutable reason. Dr. Sims was led away. He cast a final glance at Poirot and whispered, "I wanted only to protect myself, and yet you imperiled another." Poirot replied softly, "Such is the nature of unlawful fear. Come, Hastings, we return to the drawing-room. The final confrontation draws near." Through the silent manor, we walked side by side. Though tension still clung to the walls, the desperate attempt had failed. The stolen will and hidden letters lay recovered and the path cleared for Poirot's grand denouement. In the hush of triumph, I realized that only one more climax remained. The moment when every secret would reveal its final face beneath the unyielding light of truth. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place late that afternoon. The drawing-room of Styles Manor was heavy with anticipation. The grand windows, now shuttered against the failing light, left only wall sconces to cast a flickering glow upon the assembled suspects. Inspector Heathcote stood at the head of the long mahogany table, boots polished and notebook in hand. Beside him, Poirot surveyed the 9 faces: Elodie Blanchard, Philippe Marceau, Antoinette Dupont, Lady Constance Fitzwilliam, Dr. Owen Caldwell, Miss Clara Whitfield, Jules Leclerc, and, seated apart, the remorseful Harold Sims in handcuffs. The household staff hovered in the gallery, drawn by the promise of closure. Poirot cleared his throat, cane in hand. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have traversed many twists, forged letters, poisoned tinctures, planted prints, and a stolen will. One suspect has already confessed to deception, another has attempted flight. Yet the identity of the murderer remains unconfirmed. It is now time to place the final piece in the puzzle." He lifted his gaze to the inspector. "Shall we begin, Inspector?" Heathcote nodded, and Poirot continued. "First, the cord used to strangle Monsieur Deschardins. We discovered it in Caldwell's bundle, but the doctor never wielded it. It lay under the 1,000-year oak for one purpose: to be used by the killer." Poirot tapped the table. "Where a length of cord lay coiled beneath glass, we traced its origin to your own offices, Monsieur Sims. It was missing from your storage of pruning tools before the crime." Sims lowered his eyes. Poirot pressed on. "Next, the footprint discrepancy, the mismatched boot. Only one man borrowed Leclerc's single boot to obscure his own tread. You, monsieur, In that dark hour when you slipped from the billiard room unnoticed. He pointed to a mounted photograph of the prince. You sought to implicate an innocent man, but your haste betrayed you. A tremor ran through Sims's shoulders. Poirot paused, letting the weight of those two revelations settle before unveiling the crowning detail. He lifted from the tray a small fragment of linen, the black silk thread. Each suspect recognized it, part of Marceau's coat lining. But Poirot raised his other hand to counter the deception. This thread was transferred, not from Marceau's coat, but from the lining of your own. You pocketed a fragment from the banker's clothes in your haste, thinking to frame others. Even Marceau, the pattern of silk matches your own shabby cutaway. Marceau blinked in bewilderment. Sims's jaw dropped. Poirot allowed a faint smile. Thus the suppositions of mismatched prints and false fibres converge upon one guilty party. He turned his gaze to Lady Constance. You witnessed Sims's furtive manner that night. She inclined her head. Yes, I saw him loitering near the stable corridor, though I thought him merely a nervous servant. Poirot nodded, as did our gardener, Monsieur Leclerc, who noted a dark figure at the lodge door. He regarded Caldwell, and you, Doctor, who saw him depart your study clutching the forged summons. Caldwell murmured his agreement. Poirot raised a single finger. But there remained one final anomaly, the banker's ledger page found in the hidden drawer. Noting a midnight rendezvous with H.S., it took time to decipher that code. H.S. Hercule Sims. He laid the ledger page atop the will on the table. You, monsieur, were not merely a secretary, but a partner in his demise. Sims's voice broke as he rose unsteadily. Yes, I did it. I needed the money. He was going to expose me, you see. I forged the will. I lured him with Caldwell's note. I drugged him with the stolen tincture. But when he woke and struggled, his voice faltered, tears shining. I strangled him with the cord. A hush fell. Elodie covered her mouth. Marceau sank into his chair. Dupont's face crumpled. Even Lady Constance's stern features softened with sorrow. Sims pressed his hands to the table. I panicked. I did not mean for him to die. I swore I'd scare him, force him to forgive my debts. But then he recoiled, and the next thing I knew, Poirot's voice was gentle yet unyielding. Fear and guilt are close companions. You allowed them to overcome you. He placed a comforting hand on Sims's shoulder. You will now face justice. But remember, it is not hatred that carries a man to murder, but desperation. Inspector Heathcote moved forward, removing Sims's handcuffs. Harold Sims, you are under arrest for the murder of Maurice Desjardins. Anything you say may be held against you. He recited the formalities as Constable stepped forward. Dr. Sims was led away. Poirot turned to the remaining guests. Mesdames, et messieurs, the affair closes at last. The rightful will shall be read. Dr. Caldwell's name cleared, Monsieur Marceau's innocence affirmed, and the estate restored to its proper heirs. He inclined his head to Elodie and Dupont. May you both find peace after this long night. Elodie stepped forward, hand trembling in Marceau's grasp. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. My heart could not have borne another day of uncertainty. Madame Dupont offered a warm smile. Your skill honors us all, monsieur. Style manner shall remember your care. Poirot allowed himself a slight bow. I have but served truth, and in truth one finds justice and healing. As the suspects and staff filed from the room, relief and sorrow mingled in the heavy air. I lingered by Poirot's side. Mon ami, your little Bracels have triumphed once again. Poirot's gaze softened. Hastings, there is no triumph in tragedy, only the peace that follows justice. Come, let us men light the lamps of Styles. Manner, that its halls may be bright once more and its inhabitants free of fear. Together, we stepped into the corridor. leaving behind the empty drawing-room and a mist laid to rest beneath the ancient boughs of the wishing tree. Chapter 15. The final gathering following evening. A sense of solemn anticipation pervaded. Styled manner, the great hall, once bright with laughter and song, had been transformed into a tribunal. Heavy drapes were drawn, leaving only the flicker of candelabras to illuminate the polished oak floor and the long table at its center. Inspector Heathcote and several constables stood discreetly near the doors, while the staff observed from the galleries above in respectful silence dotted Poirot's direction. The 8 surviving guests were summoned one by one and escorted to seats, ranged in a semicircle before the table. Elodie Blanchard and Madame Dupont at the far left, Felipe Marceau and Lady Constance Fitzwilliam beside them, Dr. Owen Caldwell and Miss Clara Whitfield in the centre, and Jules Leclerc flanked by the now-cleansed chairs once occupied by Sims and the guilty documents. Poirot stood at the head, cane in hand, the original will and ledger fragment laid upon a velvet cushion before him. Poirot addressed the assembly in measured tones. Mesdames et messieurs, tonight we gather not to accuse, but to reconstruct. Each of you witnessed events both overt and hidden. It is my task to piece together the true sequence of last night's tragedy beneath the wishing tree. We shall walk through each moment, that the light of truth may dispel the shadows of deception. He paused to allow the gravity of his words to settle. Let us begin at the manor study, shortly before midnight. Monsieur Sims delivered to Monsieur Deschardins a folded note, bearing the seal of Lady Constance, which in truth was forged by Dr. Caldwell. That note read, "Meet at the wishing tree, and make no mistake the path, safely delivered, it Lord." The banker from his safe haven, believing in its authenticity, Poirot turned to Caldwell. "Doctor, you have confessed to writing that note, yet you did not follow Deschardins to the tree instead. You returned to care for Lady Constance. Your motive was fear of his displeasure at your possible displacement from his confidence." Caldwell inclined his head. "Yes." Next, Poirot continued. Monsieur Deschardins donned only one boot as a precaution, believing he would be alone, and slipped on the path through the east garden. He paused at the wishing tree, expecting a secret confidant. Instead, Monsieur Sims lay in wait, having borrowed one of Monsieur Leclerc's boots to mask his own tread. He turned to Leclerc. "Gardener, you discovered the boot print amid your early rounds, yet you believed it a stray accident. You did not know, then, that your tools and boots had become instruments of framing." Leclerc swallowed. I did not realize." "Beneath the tree," Poirot said, beckoning Inspector Heathcote to lift a glass case containing the silk handkerchief and scarf. Sims confronted Deschardins with the forged summons and brandished the cord he had removed from Caldwell's research kit. He offered no explanation, only desperation. The banker, accustomed to cordial conversation, recalled. Poirot paused, letting his gaze travel across the faces. Sims then produced a vial stolen from the doctor's cabinet of a sedative. He poured its contents into Deschardins's glass, hoping to weaken him, to spur a confession. Yet when Deschardins sipped, his instincts revolted. He staggered, but did not collapse. Seizing the opportunity, Sims advanced with the garrote, intent on intimidation. He leaned forward, voice dropping. In the struggle, the handkerchief dropped. The scarf snagged on a branch, and the cord tightened too far. The banker's hands flew up, choking him as he gasped. Only the master's resolve saved him from immediate unconsciousness, a resolve that would pulse until Sims's final tightening ended it. A collective intake of breath filled the hall. Elodie gasped softly. Marceau closed his eyes. Lady Constance gripped her armchair. Poirot straightened. After the deed, Sims fumbled to stave the scene. He laid Deschardins gently on the grass, ranged the fragments a torn scarf, a silk handkerchief, and buried the locket beneath loose soil, believing the drug would mask his presence. He discarded the vial. Then he fled to hide the willound ledgers, intending to frame another and to disappear into the night. He gestured to the seat formerly occupied by Sims. "Inspector, display the original will retrieved from that hiding place." A constable stepped forward and placed the will upon the table. Poirot picked it up reverently. "Here lies the true testament of Maurice Deschartres, naming Elodie Blanchard's soul heir, a choice made from genuine affection and gratitude. Yet the falsified draft hidden in the study bore yet another name, his niece, Madame Dupont, which had been destroyed in Sims's early purge of old documents. Madame Dupont's eyes shimmered, regret mingling with relief. Elodie reached for Marceau's hand. Poirot replaced the will and continued, voice gentle, thus: "The final piece falls into place. The forged letter, the borrowed boot, the stolen sedative, the misplaced fragments, the buried tokens, and the mislaid will. Each step was conceived by Sims in panic, executed in haste, and exposed by the little grey cells." He turned to Inspector Heathcote. "Inspector, I leave you to see that Monsieur Harold Sims receives his due. As for the rest, you will restore this will to its rightful signatories, and Mimi Blanchard will find her inheritance intact." Poirot lowered his voice, addressing the group. "Samus, tragedy has passed through these halls, but justice has prevailed. Let us offer one another forgiveness where it is needed, and let the memory of these dark hours guide us toward wisdom and compassion." A hush fell. Then Elodie rose, stepping forward to place a gentle hand on Poirot's arm. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice quivering, "you have restored not only my future, but my faith in human kindness. We are grateful beyond words." Poirot bowed his head. "It has been my privilege. Mademoiselle, may the wishing tree now harbor only hope," as the assembly dispersed, some in tears of remorse, others in quiet relief. The candles flickered, and the manor felt, for the first time since that fateful night, safe again, and I, standing beside my friend, sensed that the little grey cells had truly given their final gift, the illumination of truth, the balm of justice, and the promise of a new dawn at Styles Manor. Chapter 16, The Reveal. Late that evening, in the glow of a single oil lamp, Poirot convened one final gathering in the Oak-Panel drawing-room. The air was hushed. Each attendee seated in a stiff-backed chair ranged in a semicircle. Elodie Blanchard and Madame Dupont nearest the window, Felipe Marceau and Lady Constance Fitzwilliam to their right, Dr. Owen Caldwell and Miss Clara Whitfield in the centre, and Jules Leclerc beside the hearth. Inspector Heathcote stood behind Poirot, ready to record these closing moments. Poirot began softly, placing his cane across the hearth's edge. "Mesdames et messieurs, you have borne witness to my reconstruction of events: the forged summons, the borrowed boot, the stolen sedative, the misplaced fragments, and the concealed will. You know how Harold Sims, in desperation, carried out the killing, and yet another deception remains to be laid bare: the fate of the silver locket and the identity of the woman it portrayed." He stepped to the table, lifting the small glass case containing the tarnished locket. With gloved hands, he opened it, revealing the delicate portrait and lock of auburn hair. This memento belonged to one Eleonore Bouchard, a young woman of Parisian society. She was the banker's first love, his fiancée in youth, before family disgrace forced her departure. He never spoke of her, yet kept her portrait close. Elodie leaned forward, eyes wide. "He told me of a first love, many years ago, but I did not know her name." Poirot nodded. Monsieur Deschartres discovered her letters among his late father's papers, and the sight of her image moved him deeply. He hoped one day to restore her memory to the light. He turned to Lady Constance. "You knew this secret, did you not? You corresponded in code to arrange the locket's return." The elderly lady inclined her head. "I did. Monsieur Deschardins asked me to send Eleanor's portrait to her family, should they be found. He wished to reconcile the past." "Exactly," Poirot continued. "Yet Colonel Emile Bouchard, Eleanor's brother, died in the trenches. The family line ended. No one remained to receive the locket except in memory." He paused, letting the poignancy settle. He then addressed Miss Whitfield. "Mademoiselle, you tutored Elodie in French because you studied in Paris and once visited the Bouchard estate. You recognized the portrait instantly and kept that knowledge secret, hoping to secure a link between Elodie and the banker's romantic past." The governess's eyes filled with tears. I thought it would draw them together. I meant no harm." Poirot gave her a compassionate nod. "Your intentions were romantic, but misguided, and your silence allowed Sims's plot to proceed." Unchecked, he turned to Marceau. "And you, monsieur, believed that locket proved an affair between Deschardins and Blanchard's mother, thus driving you to frantic measures to protect Elodie's reputation." Marceau's face paled. Yes, I feared her scandal would ruin her. I never handled the locket with murderous intent. I only wished to hide it. Your heart was in the right place. But your actions only compounded the crime," Poirot said solemnly. He returned his gaze to the locket. "The final piece of intrigue lies here. The water that tarnished this locket was no mere dew. It came from the vial of sedative spilled during the struggle, Sims, in dropping and retrieving. This stained the metal. He thought it destroyed all evidence, but the tarnish preserved his guilt." He turned at last to the assembled group. "And so, each of you played a part in this drama. The doctor's potion, the governess's knowledge, the Viscount's fear, the gardener's unwitting tools, Lady Constance's clear rule, Madame Dupont's anguish, and Marceau's protective zeal. But only one committed the irreversible act of murder, Harold Sims, whose desperation overwhelmed his conscience." Elodie rose, voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, we cannot thank you enough. You have revealed not only a crime, but the hidden truths of our hearts." Poirot inclined his head. "In these chambers, secrets thrive in darkness. It is the duty of the little grey cells to bring them into the light." He looked to Inspector Heathcote. "Inspector, with the mystery fully revealed, I entrust you to finalize these proceedings." Heathcote stepped forward, addressing the room. "Harold Sims is charged with murder and multiple counts of forgery and attempted obstruction of justice. The original will is reinstated, and Dr. Caldwell's name is cleared." A weight lifted from the room. Lady Constance exhaled. Madame Dupont pressed Elodie's hand, and Marceau bowed his head in relief. Dr. Caldwell offered a grateful nod to Poirot, while Miss Whitfield wiped her tears. Even Jules Leclerc, who had remained silent throughout, allowed a small smile. Poirot closed the locket and returned it to its case. "Thus ends the affair at the Wishing Tree. May its branches now bear only the secrets of whispered hopes, not the burden of tragedy." As candlelight danced across the polished surfaces, I marveled at the gentle precision with which Poirot had unraveled each strand of deceit. In that moment, I understood that justice, like truth, is a delicate bloom requiring patience, insight, and above all, compassion to flourish once more in the hearts of those it heals. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justiceth Dawn following Poirot's grand reveal rose with a serene stillness over Styles Manor. Through the tall mullioned windows of the great hall, pale sunlight suffused the accustomed gloom. As if to usher in a new era of truth and order, I found Poirot seated at the table, his steaming cup of tea in his hand, surveying the room that had witnessed so much turmoil. "Mon ami," he said quietly, The wheel of justice turns slowly, but it turns inexorably. Today, we shall see its final revolution. Inspector Heathcote entered, bearing a small portfolio of documents. Monsieur Poirot, he announced, I have conferred with the solicitor, and we may now proceed with the probate of the will and the formal arraignment of Monsieur Harold Sims. He placed the papers before Poirot, the certified original will, the medical report exonerating Dr. Caldwell, and the arrest warrant for Sims. Poirot nodded approvingly. 'Twas been. Then let us begin with the most important matter. Lady Blanchard's inheritance, won not through greed, but gratitude. He handed the will to Elodie, who held it with trembling reverence. Madame Dupont stepped forward, smoothing the folds of her burgundy dress. "My dear niece," she said softly, "this fortune is yours by your father's design. Use it well, and remember that you are loved beyond measure." She took Elodie's hand, tears shining in her eyes. Elodie pressed the will to her heart. "Thank you," and she whispered, "I promise to honor his memory and to live a life worthy of his faith." Felipe Masso, standing beside Elodie, bowed his head, "And I promise to stand by you, no matter what the future brings." Elodie's eyes met his, and in that glance lay the unspoken bond of trust restored. Poirot watched them with gentle satisfaction. Justice favors not only the guilty punished, but the innocent restored. He turned to Dr. Caldwell. "Doctor, your reputation has been besmirched by false suspicion. I trust you will continue your noble practice. Now vindicated." Caldwell bowed deeply. "Monsieur Poirot, you have saved me from a fate worse than death's scandal. I shall forever be in your debt." Miss Clara Whitfield, still pale from her revelations, stepped forward next. "Monsieur Poirot, I behaved unwisely in concealing the locket's secret. Though my intentions were innocent, I delayed justice. I beg your forgiveness." Poirot inclined his head with kind gravity. "We all make errors of the heart. Your remorse is sufficient atonement." "Mademoiselle, yet let this be a lesson. Truth, however painful, must conquer fear." Jules Leclerc, the gardener, approached with rough, honest steps. "Monsieur Poirot, I regret my earlier silence when I first saw those prints. Forgive my timidity." Poirot smiled. "Your integrity remained intact. You did no wrong, save in waiting for a clear light. Your service to the estate is beyond reproach." Lady Constance Fitzwilliam, elegant as ever, offered her white-gloved hand. "I owe you gratitude, monsieur, for protecting me from suspicion." He took her hand gently. "Your cooperation helped illuminate the path to truth. That is thanks. Enough." Finally, all eyes turned to Inspector Heathcote as he rose to address the room. "Monsieur Sims has been taken into custody." He laid the arrest warrant on the table. "He will stand trial for murder, forgery, and obstruction of justice. With this, we bring an end to the darkness that enveloped these grounds." A hush fell as Sims, escorted by constables, entered the hall. His shoulders were stooped, his gaze hollow. He paused in front of the assembly, then turned to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, voice hoarse, "I am ready to face the consequences of my crimes." Poirot's expression was grave. He stepped forward and placed a hand upon Sims's shoulder. "Justice demands that you answer for your actions, but remember that confession is the first step toward redemption. May the outcome of your trial reflect the full measure of the truth you have now confessed." Sims inclined his head and allowed the constables to lead him away. The manor seemed to exhale, the weight of guilt lifting from its ancient beams. Poirot returned to the hearth, where the morning light now spilled across the polished floor. He motioned for me to accompany him. "Hastings, the affair is concluded, the innocent restored, the guilty to judgment. Our work here is complete." I poured him a fresh cup of tea and exhaled deeply. It has been a journey through deception and despair, yet your calm reasoning never faltered. He offered a small, wry smile. Chaos tests the spirit, mon ami, but order restores it, and justice that delicate bloom requires both time and truth too. Flourish, as the household began the process of healing Elodie and Felipe planning their future. Dupont tending quietly to the estate's affairs, Caldwell returning to his practice, and Lady Constance departing for her travels. I realized that Poirot's intervention had offered not only resolution, but renewal. The wishing tree would once more bear witness to innocent dreams rather than dark designs. Before I took my leave, Poirot stood beneath the grand staircase, cane in hand. Surveying the returning staff, he turned to me. "Let us go. Hastings. Styles Manor has its peace restored. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher in a cloudless sky. I followed Poirot down the steps, the estate's ancient oaks whispering overhead. And as we passed the wishing tree, its branches now green with promise, I felt the full measure of our journey. A masterful unraveling of lies, a steadfast pursuit of truth, and the quiet triumph of justice over despair. Thus concluded the outcome and justice of the affair. At the wishing tree, the memory of tragedy remained, but it was tempered by the certainty that wrongs had been righted, and that in Poirot's meticulous hands. Even the darkest secrets had at last been brought into the light. Chapter 18. The Closing. Remark morning dawned clear and bright over Styles Manor, as though the very walls had exhaled their long-held tension. I joined Hercule Poirot on the terrace overlooking the gardens, the soft chirring of birds and the distant hum of carriage wheels forming a gentle counterpoint to the trials of the past days. He stood, cane in hand, gazing reflectively at the ancient wishing tree, its leaves newly green in spring's embrace. "Mon ami," he said at last, "all is as it should be, the innocent vindicated, the guilty condemned, and the estate's rightful heir secured." He paused, eyes never leaving the tree. "But justice, while necessary, is not the end of our tale. It is but the foundation upon which lives may rebuild." I nodded. "Elodie and Monsieur Marceau plan to marry, and the manor will flourish under their stewardship. Madame Dupont has taken a quiet role beside them. Dr. Caldwell returns to his practice with his reputation restored, and Miss Whitfield seeks a fresh start in Paris. Even poor Monsieur Sims has shown remorse, though his fate lies now in the hands of the courts." Poirot's mustache twitched in approval. "Each has been afforded the opportunity for redemption, or renewal. Yet, Hastings, observe how life continues with hope, fear, laughter, and sorrow interwoven." He beckoned me to follow him down a gravel path winding through the rose garden. Here Madame Dupont and Elodie bent so tenderly over newly planted blooms that they might have been tending to fragile hopes. There, Lady Constance Fitzwilliam chatted quietly with Dr. Caldwell on a bench, conspiratorial smile marking the relief of shared exoneration. Near the gardener's lodge, Jules Leclerc inspected fresh lavender borders, his earlier misgivings replaced by determined purpose. Poirot regarded each scene with satisfaction. See Hastings. How each actor returns to his proper place upon the stage of life. He paused beneath the wishing tree's arching boughs. This tree has witnessed sorrow and crime, yet now it stands as a symbol not of fear, but of renewal. Let us leave it to its quiet vigil. I glanced at the carved initials EB and PM recently added, uniting Elodie and Felipe in living testament. They have already made their mark, I observed with a smile. Poirot chuckled softly. A modest legacy, but a sincere one, and modesty, my friend, is the greatest adornment of the human heart. He turned to me, eyes bright. "Now, Hastings, our work here is truly done. Soon I shall return to London, but Styles Manor will remain in good hands." I placed a hand on his arm. "You have given them more than justice, Poirot. You have given them understanding the insight that even the darkest deeds spring from human frailty, and that compassion must temper judgment. He inclined his head, voice warm. Compassion, yes, but never sentiment pure. One must always temper the heart with reason. The little grey cells demanded. He tapped his temple playfully. And in the dance of humanity, it is reason that leads, while the heart follows. A light breeze stirred the branches overhead, scattering petals like pale confetti. Poirot smiled, lifting his cane in a graceful salute to the wishing tree. May its roots run deep, and its branches shelter dreams unmet by deceit. I surveyed the scene one last time, slowly brushing a stray leaf from her dress, Marceau offering an arm to guide her along the path, Dupont pausing to inhale the rose fragrance, the doctor nodding to Lady Constance, Whitfield collecting sprigs of lavender, Leclerc stooping to tend a blossom. All had returned, weary but resolute, to the steady rhythm of daily life. Turning to Poirot, I remarked, "It is as if time itself has been restored." He nodded, a serene gleam in his eyes. Time and justice, Hastings, both must be patient, both must be precise, and when they work together, the world is set right again, one little grey cell at a time. With that, he tapped his cane against the stone terrace, and together we strolled back toward the Manor's inviting warmth. Behind us, the wishing tree stood sentinel, no longer the stage of tragedy, but the guardian of new beginnings. Thus closed the affair at the wishing tree, a tale of hidden motives and human frailty, resolved by the unerring insight of Hercule Poirot, and as the sun climbed higher, illuminating every corner of Styles Manor, I felt certain that justice, once served, grants the greatest wish of all, the freedom to forgive, to heal, and to hope anew.